The beauty of that voice of insecurity is an earnest recognition that I'm not everything. But the dark side of that voice is when we let that voice convince us that we're nothing.
It's about time because we're going there. Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of We're Going There. I am your host, Bianca Olthoff, and here in this podcast, we get to have real conversations and not be afraid of going there. So today, let's go there. And I'm doing it from a personal perspective. I've shared this story before, but the concept of our conversation today is going to be me talking to you about conquering the critic within, speaking truth with confidence, and using our insecurity as fuel. And this perspective is going to come from one where I felt like I epically failed. While speaking at a conference alongside a respected pastor, it was one of those moments where I felt like I fell flat on my face. So on this conversation, I want to discuss the imposter syndrome that we feel and the internal saboteur that questions our abilities and our worth. Today, I want to have an honest conversation about the importance of humility and using the voice of insecurity as a tool rather than a weapon. For me, I know that this season of my life, I'm called to proclaim the truth, and I want to encourage listeners, I want to encourage you to ask yourself the question by the end of this podcast. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? I hope you enjoy, friends.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of We're Going There. I want to pop in and share with you what I'm learning when I'm learning it, because I think it might be beneficial to you. But let me start off with the fact that I flew to a conference I was asked to attend. There were a number of speakers there, but I was the last speaker of the day, and I didn't think the other speakers were going to be there. Quite honestly, I thought that they were going to fly in and fly out. It was a one-day conference, so when I arrived, it was for the last segment of the day, and I was going to be the last speaker of the day. Well, one of the speakers who I saw was going to be there was someone who I have admired for years, literally over a decade. So much of my love and my passion for teaching the Word of God has come single-handedly from this man. Years ago, I would download his podcast and his sermons, and I would take copious, color-coded notes. His teaching was formative and informative in my studying. Never would I ever imagine years later, I would be teaching the Word of God. Hand to heaven, I thought I was going to get into the art world and open my own art gallery. So that in and of itself almost felt like a miracle. But never, ever would I ever have guessed that I would be teaching at the exact same conference with this esteemed pastor who I valued for so many years. God has a funny sense of humor. I was getting mic'd up for my session, and in walks said pastor. Now, he is disarming and kind and warm and effortlessly humorous. I assumed that he was done with his teaching and he was packing up, getting ready to leave. But unbeknownst to me, he started to get mic'd. As in mic'd up to head on the stage. And apparently, he was in the last session of the day as well. When I started putting the pieces together, I froze. I knew he was going to go before me, and secretly I hoped that he would race out to catch a flight, or he'd be pulled away to pastor someone in great need, or be whisked away to the green room to work on his next amazing and stirring sermon. But no. After his session, peppered with poignant points of profound power, he told his host that he wanted to stay for the closing session and he wanted to listen to me. After eavesdropping that he was staying, I tried so hard to keep my cool, but I started schwitzing. I'm not even kidding you. And I told myself, hey, this is not that big of a deal. He's totally human. He's just another person in the audience. See, this pastor has openly stated his views of women's roles in church and leadership and is seminary trained. Without getting too deeply into his views, let's just say that he'd question my permission and freedom in leading, teaching, and preaching at the level that I do. And though we differ in our views, that doesn't make me value his gifts any less. It did, however, surface a feeling of ineptitude. As we were preparing for my session to start, I felt the creeping insecurity that haunted me as a child well up inside of me. The ugly voice of insecurity whispered in a oh-so-familiar voice, "Who are you to do this? Does what you have prepared to say today, does it really matter? You're not even seminary trained, and this guy is rightfully going to pick apart your talk and reveal to everyone how ill-equipped you are to do this." Have you been there? Have you felt like what you're asked or called or invited to do feels far away, outside of your comfort zone, or maybe even your skill level? Friend, join the crowd. I quieted the voice in my mind and prayed silently for myself before I stepped onto the platform. I have to be honest with you. This was the very first time that this has ever happened to me, and I pray to God it's the last. But as I was on the stage teaching the word that I believe I was supposed to share, I was saying the words that I had prepared to the crowd, but I was simultaneously talking to myself and to God. I'm not even kidding you. So I was saying what I had prepared, but I was talking to myself. I was praying in my head. I said, "Dear God, I am so nervous. I'm talking about a leadership topic and a leadership concept that might feel possibly controversial to a room of this size, but I know that you gave me this word and I know that you opened the door for me. So will you not let me be intimidated, sidetracked, or swayed by who is here? This isn't about one man on the front row. This is about you giving me the word that you wanted me to share with your people." So let's pause for a second, because there is a term floating around that maybe you might have heard of, but it's in many circles, and it's imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. I heard a recent episode on the Jasmine Star podcast with Kat Cole. She's an entrepreneur, mogul, and overall boss. When asked her thoughts about imposter syndrome, she said a new term I hadn't heard before. She said the voice in our head is an internal saboteur, because imposter syndrome makes it sound like it's rare, but it's not. We all have it. We sabotage ourselves. What is the internal saboteur? It's the voice that says, "Who am I to do this?" Or, "Do I even belong here?" Or, "Should I even speak up because everyone else is so good?" Yeah, those voices, the ones that you've probably heard yourself. Before we move forward about the voices that cripple us, I have to admit that there is something refreshingly humbling about those questions. Those questions always keep me in a posture of grace, wonder, and praising God for his favor. In fact, the speaker who I so admired and also just happened to be sitting in the front row while I preached said this phrase that rung true during his talk, and it poignantly hit my soul and hasn't left me to this day. He said, "Stay humble or you will be humiliated," because there are only two options, humble or humiliated. While those two words sound the same and they're derived from the same Latin root word, they are on opposite ends of the spectrum in regards to meaning. Humiliation is to cause a painful loss of pride, self-respect, or dignity. The opposite is humility. Humility means a modest opinion of one's own importance. Do you see the difference? The greatest difference has to do with autonomy. Being humble is an individual's choice, while being humiliated is a situation an individual is thrust into, sometimes by another person. While I stood on that stage, I felt a bead of sweat slowly trickle down the nape of my back. I didn't cry, I didn't crumble, I didn't break or balk. Those questions I asked myself before the stage forced me to wrestle with humility. The beauty of that voice of insecurity is an earnest recognition that I'm not everything. I'm not perfect. I'm definitely not the most qualified or the most educated. But the dark side of that voice is when we let that voice convince us that we're nothing. And it's that space in between that when I hear those questions, I have to decide, should I listen to it? Will it stifle me or silence me? Because the questions are natural. And truthfully, I'm still relatively young and inexperienced. And let's throw into the mix that I'm also female and a woman of color. It's natural to question my authority or my relevance to a moment or a situation or a topic or leadership. But it doesn't mean I have to submit to it. I came to a point in that conference that I realized I shouldn't be afraid of that voice. In fact, I should actually listen to that voice for a moment, do some inventory, take in more of what's going on so I'm more thoughtful about whatever I say next or do next. Like Kat Cole says, I use that voice as a tool, not a weapon against myself. In that moment of feeling less than and underqualified, two things clicked in my brain. One, I'm here for a reason. As in, like, somebody put me here. I didn't appoint myself to this conference. I didn't email the conference lead. I didn't send them my resume. I didn't ask them, hey, please bring me in to teach. And that reminder alone is enough to sometimes silence or quiet the internal saboteur. Sometimes it's just one of the things I have to remind myself to do. Hey, I didn't campaign for this invitation. Somebody put me here because they thought I had something to say. The second thing that works for me is I remind myself that I've got a job to do. I am called to proclaim the truth that has been deposited in me. If I don't, who will? What a shame to have a seat at the table and not use my voice. Now that sounds really simple to do, but it's not. It takes time and repeated development to ward off the self-doubt voices. That new monologue of reminding myself of who I am and whose I am. Yeah, those two tools can be sharpened and reached for quickly when the voices begin to rise up inside. I've been told multiple times that I seem so confident, so self-assured, so unwavered by doubt. But I'll give you my secret. The inner saboteur's voice is sultry and silky and seems innocuous in her questions. So I have learned to remind myself that I didn't knock on doors. They simply open because of discipline, hard work, gifting, calling, and purpose. And what may appear as confidence is really Godfidence. It's a God-given confidence. I have learned so many times that over and over that those voices will capitalize on my insecurity and keep me quiet unless I silence her with these two questions. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? Friend, I'm asking you this. Why not you? I want to tell you that I ended that talk with a rousing ovation while the heavens opened and the voice of God echoed into the room, booming with these words, "This is my daughter in whom I am well pleased." But that didn't happen. Though it wasn't the best or most confident I felt while teaching, God showed up and I know people's lives were changed. If I'm honest with you, it was a truly humbling experience. And though I have done so much soul work in developing my Godfidence and confidence in my calling, I was painfully reminded of my fragile insecurity. It was humbling to know just how one person I've admired for years can wake up my inner saboteur and make me question my calling. But I leave you with these two perennial questions that I ask myself every Sunday before preaching and anytime that I'm asked to do something outside of my natural strength. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? I love you, friend. And I hope that your inner saboteur doesn't stop you from doing what God's called you to do. If this podcast has blessed you and you want to share it with some friends, you can go ahead and share it to social media and tag me at Bianca Olthoff. If this podcast is something you enjoy, will you consider leaving a positive review and also sharing with your friends? We have more podcasts coming your way. I'm so grateful for you. Thanks for listening.